All right, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Pamela Chang from the Transport Sector Office at the Asian Development Bank, and I oversee the e-mobility support and investment platform. So I'd like to warmly welcome each and every one of you to this very first webinar of our new series in 2024 on e-mobility trends and policy measures in Asia and the Pacific, and it will be presented by Alvin Mejia. So we're kicking off a new year of our webinar series under the umbrella of e-mobility support and investment platform for the Asian Pacific. And this aims to build capacities and to support scaling up of financing to e-mobility initiatives. This platform is operated by ADB, co-implemented by the UNEP, and co-financed by the Global Environment Facility. And if you'd like to join the e-mobility community under the platform to stay up to date on the platform's activities, please fill in your needs assessment survey, where our needs assessment survey, where you can leave us your contact details in case you have not done so already. And the QR code to the survey is now available on the screen. So we have an exciting lineup of discussions planned for you this year, where we will deep dive into scaling up of e-mobility. And you can see the planned sessions for Q1 here. We have focus areas of interest expressed by our community members, covering policy, technology, and finance-related aspects of e-mobility, such as interurban EV charging, battery value chain, as well as a case study from Malaysia. So next week, we will hear about micromobility, and we will be sharing the Zoom registration link in the chat of this webinar. And so for today's session, it will be moderated by my colleague, Tom Fleming, from our implementation partner from Integrated Transport Planning. So let me hand over to Tom for him to lead us through the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam, and I trust everyone can hear me okay. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Before diving into the house rules, I just wanted to highlight a subtle tweak that we've made for Series 2, taking sort of learnings from Series 1, and that's that excitingly, we've decided to extend the webinar slot from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and that's really to allow a little bit more time for Q&A. So if we have lots of questions, we can take more of them. So that's the aim there. So next slide, please. Fantastic. So house rules for today's webinar. So your microphones will be muted unless you are invited to speak, but you can use the Q&A function if you would like to ask a question during the presentation. So please do so, and we'll pick them up. We'll pick them up at the end as part of the Q&A, and I'll pose them to our speaker today. Next slide, please. So today's webinar will be delivered by Alvin Mejia. Alvin is a director at the Urban Electric Mobility Initiative, and he's also a transport specialist at the Asian Transport Outlook. Alvin's experience is diverse, includes sustainable mobility, urban development, and environmental management, and he's previously worked at the Wuppertal Institute, as well as for Clean Air Asia. Those of you who participated in our platform workshop in November may recall Alvin, who provided a pre-recording presentation for us in Seoul, which I know was really well received, and now we get to meet him in person. Well, kind of almost. So Alvin will be sharing trends and insights on e-mobility in developing Asia and the Pacific, looking at key data and policies, and sharing some good practice with us as well. So without further ado, Alvin, I'll pass over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much, Tom. I hope you are able to hear me. Yeah, and hopefully you can also see my screen properly. So, oh, oops, sorry. Let me just.
Yeah, all good, Alvin. We can.
Yeah, there you go. So hi, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alvin Mejia, and it's a pleasure for me to share some of the insights relating to trends in e-mobility, as well as looking into how policy measures are evolving using selected snippets in some of the countries in the Asia and Pacific. And the presentation essentially aims at focusing, providing a broad stroke insights in terms of where the region is at, or the countries in the region is at, in terms of electrification, and more so in terms of the evolution of the policy measures relevant to e-mobility. We will first look at very broad trends in terms of the state and outlooks in terms of electric vehicles, infrastructure, picking out some of the main issues, and then we will look into policy measures and how these are evolving. Again, the presentation does not claim to be a very comprehensive representation of the policy development across the board, but rather it aims to be more of a sharing of useful information, reflection, and insights about notable trends in how policies are evolving and how these are related to the scaling up of the adoption of e-mobility in the region. So very quickly, please allow me to introduce the organization, Urban Electric Mobility Initiative, which was launched at the UN Climate Summit in 2014. We had been working towards supporting the acceleration of the uptake of urban mobility solutions, including e-mobility, globally. It is also the mobility hub of the first UN Habitat Collaboration Center called the Urban Living Lab Center, which features the cooperation between UN Habitat, MIT, TU Berlin, and the Wuppertal Institute. We coordinate the various international cooperation projects, including the Global E-Mobility Solutions Plus project that is being supported primarily by the EU. We have specific activities here in Asia, particularly in Pasig, Philippines, Hanoi, Vietnam, and Kathmandu, Nepal, in bringing forth innovative and locally appropriate e-mobility solutions together with capacity building and policy support. We are also a part of the e-mobility ASAP project consortium that is supporting the Department of Trade and Industry and the Bureau of the BOI here in the Philippines towards enhancing the enabling conditions for e-mobility adoption. And also, a lot of the slides that you would see here, we have developed in cooperation with the Asian Transport Outlook. I'm also part of this project, which is a project that was initiated by the Asian Development Bank and is also now being supported by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It is a project really aimed at strengthening the knowledge base on transport in Asia and Pacific, and really enabling the utilization of data towards making better decisions in the sector. It has collated data from national statistics, expert organizations for, let's say, more than 50 economies in the region on various areas such as infrastructure, transport activity, access, connectivity, road safety, air pollution, climate change, among others. So I highly advise everyone to have a look at the website as well, Asian Transport Outlook, to look at the data as well as the different knowledge products that have been developed by the team, looking into these various pillars and various dimensions of sustainability and the transport sector in general in the region. So moving to the main gist of the presentation, we first look at the e-mobility as really a key opportunity for the region in terms of transforming the transportation sector. E-mobility in Asia will also define e-mobility globally due to the scale as well as the growth in terms of transportation demand, as well as the role that countries are playing in terms of the value chains globally. Essentially, we are seeing that the projections would say that moving up to 2050, at least more than half of the growth in terms of the passenger and freight activity would still expect to be happening in the region. So essentially, how we treat our transport systems and how we transition towards electrification bears really a significant weight globally, and how e-mobility would play out at the global level. Asia is key for e-mobility development, also due to its dominance in number one, adopting electric vehicles right now, particularly by selected countries, as evidenced by data, for example, from the International Energy Agency. We need to highlight, though, that these leadership dominance is primarily right now being driven by economies such as China, India, and the more advanced Asian economies such as Japan, Korea. The IEA, for example, estimates that at least 80% of the e-bus sales in 2022 were accounted for by China, 58% of the e-car sales as well, and the e-truck sales around 46%. In terms of the e-vans, more than 60% are accounted for by China, Japan, and Korea. And aside from these vehicles, we also know that Asia is basically dominating as well the 2- and 3-wheeler market space. Estimates states that more than 90% of the 2-wheelers, including the electric ones, sales are happening in the region as well. But while we are seeing all these trends in terms of the region or the countries in the region leading the space, we still have a long way to go. The graph here essentially shows you the gap or where we are currently in terms of the electrification of the different modes, in terms of, let's say, the share of electric vehicles in terms of the total stock, for example, of buses in China, India, Japan, and other regions. Let's say 14% for e-buses estimate from the IEA and the DNV for buses, and a lot less for the different other types of vehicles. We have a long way to go, and we are really observing that this magnitude that we need to fulfill within the next few years is really something very significant, and not just in Asia but also globally. And more so, if we look at the trajectories, the estimated trajectories moving forward into the future, based on the recent information that we have and the estimates, for example, from DNV, looking at the trajectories for your the electrification of the 2-wheelers, the passenger cars, and the trucks, for example, we see that more or less full electrification will be achieved around 2040 for the 2-wheelers, but the cars would probably end up less than 60% electrified by 2050, and the trucks would be less than 50% by 2050. Now, if we look into estimates in terms of what would be needed to achieve, let's say, the global goals of maintaining the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. So definitely looking into emissions mitigation efforts. What the International Renewable Energy Agency is saying is that at least we need 93% of our passenger cars fleets to be electrified and 60% of the trucks to be electrified by 2050. So it's a gargantuan effort to change the trajectories leading up to these levels compared to what we are expected to have, at least in Asia. These are just focusing the global estimates, needed percentages against the Asian values. So we still have a long way to go. And also in terms of the charging infrastructure, which we know is a key enabler for scaling up e-mobility, what we know right now is that Asia is also exhibiting leadership globally. At least 3/4 of the total public charging points globally are found in the region. And what IEA is saying is that 61% of the slow chargers and 87% of the fast charging points are found in the region. The growth is not just happening in the major economies, but also the other smaller the other Asian countries are also catching up. And while we see these sorts of positive trajectories moving forward with the adoption of electric mobility, we also feel the need to contribute towards understanding the space, and that's why we are coming up with these e-mobility profiles, which are a collaboration between the UMI, the Asian Transport Outlook, and we have been uploading these profiles, the ones that we've done. If you go to the e-mobility.tools toolbox, which is a toolbox that has been developed by the Solutions Plus project in cooperation with the UNEP Global E-Mobility Program, as well as the Asian Transport Outlook.com website. We had done some analysis for several of the countries, finished several profiles that we are ongoing in terms of the work, and some of these slides later on would be focusing on showing some of the insights from these e-mobility profiles and the process that we've done to be able to get here. So very quickly, you'll see things like background information, socioeconomic transport indicators, vehicle stock projections, CO2 emissions for the sector, other things such as storylines related to e-mobility, information on charging points, electricity prices, access to electricity, grid emission factors, and specific sections on very succinct ones on the main developments in terms of e-mobility policy measures. So just in case you would be interested, please have a look at the profiles and also let us know what you think. But essentially, what have we been observing so far in terms of the policy developments? Firstly, we would like to look at the targets. We just to discuss the targets in general. What we're seeing is that various targets at varying levels that are being supported by various policy measures are being adopted across the region. So the table here just shows you the variety and the scale, the types and categories of the targets. Just focusing on the electric vehicle side of things. This is again like simplification. But we are documenting stock-based targets, production-based targets, sales-based targets, whether they come in different forms and sizes. This is also very similar to the charging infrastructure. The key thing is that more and more targets are being adopted and are being revised to or being strengthened recently. The concerning thing sometimes is that there would be different information from different agencies in the same countries. So it also reflects a little bit of lack of, let's say, consolidation in terms of the strategies moving forward and essentially the vision. And when we talk about scaling up, we cannot talk about scaling up in the region without talking about the electric 2 and 3-wheelers. Let's say it's very much crucial in terms of avoiding alternative car-intensive growth trajectories. And it's also a vehicle segment that's very important to lower income families, for example, and it needs a lot of consideration. What we are seeing is that really a variation in terms of how these are being governed, particularly on the regulation side of things, as different approaches are based on different definitions for, let's say, even subcategories, which are defined either by things like dimension, motor power, propulsion modality, whether these are throttle-based, pedal assist. There are different requirements in terms of operations, in terms of registration, who can operate these things. So a lot of these different considerations. So I think this also reflects the nuances of how these particular types of vehicles are being used and being of importance to different countries. The thing is that it needs to be continuously monitored and adjusted across time if needed. And in relation to adjustments, what we are also seeing is that in terms of the key topics related to scaling up the provision of various incentives and incentives towards stimulating markets. When we talk about the fiscal measures, number one, we've been documenting a lot of different fiscal measures. I think more than 70 now for the countries that we have been looking into, unique types of fiscal measures. And a lot of these measures are focused primarily on supporting the acquisition of equipment. So support for the acquisition, the procurement of electric vehicles, for example. We are also reminded that the pacing is important and adjustments are needed. So for example, in Thailand and also recently, I think in China, you've seen adjustments or lowering down, for example, purchase subsidies for electric cars, to adjust to how the market has been responding in the past and to avoid unnecessary, let's say, subsidies, which can be used elsewhere, as the willingness to pay for electric vehicles has naturally adjusted. The same could be applied in terms of the non-fiscal incentives. For example, in the Philippines, the law that we have, the EVITA law, provides incentives such as exemptions from number coding, free parking, exemption from registration. So quite important at this stage, but we also need to consider at some point that needs to be revisited, reviewed, and the criteria for such should be clear and documented. Otherwise, there are also risks related to having these incentives unchecked in the longer term. Scaling up also requires the recognition of the of various emergent use cases and business models brought about by e-mobility. The use of e-vehicles not only lead towards the emergence of new business models, but also lead towards changes to specific aspects in terms of operations, in terms of systems, in terms of service provisions, and these need to be documented and addressed. Numerous business models are also emerging in terms of the provision of charging infrastructure services, integrated services such as payments, among others. So a couple of examples here. The emergence of such new emergent business models also bring forth different innovations in how players are engaging. So in Thailand, with the support of the government, the Ministry of Energy and the Energy Regulatory Commission, they put up, together with the EVAT, or the Electric Vehicle Association, they put up an EV charging consortium, which is meant also to enable the data exchange, ensure the interoperability between the different charging operators, and bring forth the engagement of supply equipment companies, among others, into the system. In Indonesia, what we're seeing is that they're putting up a provision in terms of guidance, in terms of the business models related to public electric vehicle charging stations, as well as battery exchange stations, which are something at very least would be needed in terms of moving forward. And we also know that one of the key or common cited key barriers to scaling up e-mobility in the region is lack of charging and charging infrastructure. We have been documenting various policy measures on this. In Bangladesh, they've issued EV charging guidelines, which clarifies the roles and provides overall directions towards the development of charging infrastructure in the country. They provide specific information on the tariffs, on the service charges, and they provide application forms, requirements, safety standards related to these things. And it also stresses the priority in terms of where the stations should be located, phased approach, so city centers, and then later looking at other areas. In Uzbekistan, they have this provision that moving forward, as of this January, that all newly built business and shopping centers, entertainment places, among others, especially those that are situated in the national and international highways, should have charging stations, or at least provisions for those. In Thailand, the BOI investments have been revised to make simplify procedures, and they allowed revised the rule in terms of the eligibility to avail other privileges from other agencies, other incentives, to be able to let's say support particularly fast charging stations, putting them up. And in Indonesia, they revised a requirement that previously hindered the proliferation of charging infrastructure, because in the previous rule, they were required to have at least 3 types of ports in the charging stations, which was very difficult for the investors, operators. So now they only have 1. And then we now look into institutional setups. So scaling up also requires the evolution of these institutions evolving and filling in voids institutional and capacity-wise. Some of the examples here, for example, in Thailand, they put up the National Electric Vehicle Policy Committee, which was very instrumental in terms of providing the overall strategy, as well as promotion of the innovation of the technology, among others. Very reminiscent of what happened in India. I think this started back in 2011 when they announced the formation of the National Council for Electric Mobility, which is also supported by the National Board. And then in some other countries, such as Fiji, they're integrating the topics of e-mobility into wider task force discussions, focusing more on wider frameworks on sustainable transport. One key thing, at least for the Philippines, I thought it was very important that the law also recognizes the importance of building the capacities, for example, of local governments, as well as operators, drivers, and technicians that are to be impacted or affected by the transition to electric mobility. So just having this recognition about the need to support this. And we also need to scale up e-mobility in the correct manner, and we should not forget the mobility hierarchy. So again, like prioritizing things like public transport, high capacity transport. A lot of things have happened, for example, in India and the National Electric Bus Program. In the Philippines, electrification is being integrated in the public transport modernization. E-bus targets are aggressive e-bus targets in Thailand, also in Indonesia, and a lot of, let's say, projects, pilot projects happening across the board, even in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other countries. Essentially, more or less, a lot of, majority of the countries that we need to look into a lot of these integrated pilot cases as well. And in terms of scaling up, it's I think there's also a wider sense in terms of capturing e-mobility as an opportunity for industries and developing locally appropriate pathways for those. I won't go through in detail, but for example, Bangladesh has this vision to become a regional hub for EV production by 2030. Same with Thailand. They have like the 30% target of vehicles produced by 2030 to be EV. And then in Kazakhstan, they have something very similar to the Philippines, EVIDA, or the Electric Vehicle Industry Development Act. And a lot of these, let's say, even localization strategies are popping up, very similar to what has happened in the past in China, wherein specific, let's say, percentages of the materials that are used are supposed to be local, and which are backed up by various fiscal and non-fiscal incentives as well. And maybe finally, looking at the scaling up for the longer term, I think one of the key important things that we need to look into or would be looking at e-mobility not scaling up other issues, particularly end-of-life batteries. I think through the analysis of the different measures that we were looking into for the different countries, it's very difficult to find comprehensive strategies on battery end-of-life management, recycling, these sorts of measures. But some of them we found things like in Bangladesh, they're looking into incentives towards setting up battery recycling industries. We found also that in Kazakhstan, they have ambitious framework for extended producer responsibility. And I think in the law, they also requires the coordination between the operators of the facilities, the EPR facilities, what they call, in terms of providing support towards the installation, procurement, provision of financial support for charging stations in cities, for example. They have a very ambitious 90% target for at least the components of each vehicle to be recycled. And this is also very similar in Tajikistan. We documented integration of battery recycling technologies development as part of the overall electric transport development program. So yeah, in terms of the insights there, I would just like to close the presentation saying that again, like Asia is holding its role in being a key region for determining the future of e-mobility globally. It's also worthwhile again to emphasize that e-mobility needs to be embedded in a wider sustainability framework. It's not just about electrifying the vehicles, especially not just about electrifying the cars, but putting it in the maintaining it within the wider sustainable transport and sustainability framework. We need to have an adopted evolution and adjustment of the policy measures, which are key towards effective scaling up, moving into the future. And yeah, the electrification of the sector entails a recognition of the interlinkages of the different sectors, and that we need to utilize a wider socio-technical paradigm in terms of looking at the scaling up of electrification in the transport sector into the future. And I think with that, I would like to thank you for your patience. I hope I'm still on time. So yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Alvin. So many interesting insights. packed into a relatively short space of time, and great representation there across the whole Asia Pacific region too. So hopefully there's something in that everyone can relate to. I think for me the key takeaway there really is, or it's almost the shock, but it's not a shock, but it probably should shock, is that we've got about a 33% gap for cars and a 10% gap on trucks in terms of where we're expecting to be by 2050, based on where we need to be to achieve to sort of hold good on our climate obligations. So I think that's just highlights and underscores really the importance of this platform and what we're all trying to achieve. Thank you so much. I just want to remind people to post any questions that they have for Alvin in the Q&A feature. I see we've got a couple floating in, so thank you for those who have done so already. Alvin, if I may, just to kick off the Q&A, what do you think remain sort of the top long-term barriers that need to be addressed in order to scale up e-mobility in the region?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. I think for the question, I think based on the the work that we have been doing in terms of looking at the different countries, there's always the focus and the stress primarily, I would say, would remain in terms of the attention being given towards looking at the challenges. They focus, and sometimes they are very much relegated to looking at the technological challenges. So like things like the charging, the lack of charging infrastructure, and maybe the price differential, the current price differential for the vehicles. But I think just to put it on the table as well, which also to put it into the discussions, what we don't know much so far, I think those would be the ones that would be challenging to address in the longer term. So things like non-technological related, which are not yet, let's say, classified as limiting barriers, but we are seeing, for example, in terms of looking at the skills needed and the capacities needed towards the transition to effective electric mobility. So when we look at the labor markets, when we look at governance structures, I think these are things that we need to elevate in terms of the discussions when we look at the barriers. There are a lot of, let's say, studies happening everywhere in terms of looking at the price parity for the vehicles, looking at the strategies, technological strategies, planning strategies for where, for example, the stations would be. But it's supposed like there's really a huge gap in terms of looking at the institutions and the capacities, and I think it deserves a little bit more attention in terms of let's say, recognizing those as also important challenges to address, particularly in the longer term. Thanks.
Super, thanks, Alvin. And aligned to that, I see we have a question asking what would be the key social aspects to consider in scaling up e-mobility, and particularly in relation to your last slide on the socio-technical paradigm.
Yeah, there would be several, but like, for example, even just when we look at the transition towards electrifying, let's say, paratransit or public transport sectors in general, the technological aspects, the vehicles, the charging infrastructure, that's different. But when we look at how the labor markets would react, for example, in terms of the different skill sets that are needed once you electrify your sector. So an electric bus would be very much different from an ordinary ICE bus, and the types of skills that would be needed towards maintaining the vehicles would be very different. And just considering the impacts of changing the vehicles on that one, on the maintenance side of things, and the affected markets in terms of the labor, in terms of the technicians, in terms of the service crew, looking into these types of vehicles. There's a lot of tension that needs to be addressed, a lot of gaps. There might be some need to address, let's say, providing alternative means of livelihood, just in case, towards addressing, the sorts of population and segments, labor segments that would negatively be impact in the transition. So I think that's one key thing that we need to consider as part of the overall challenges, particularly on the social side of things.
Thanks, Alvin. I see we've got a question from Abhishek relating to differences between sales data and stock data. Abhishek, could I invite you to pose your question to Alvin? It's okay. Feel free to do so if you're still there. Might need to unmute if so. Not sure if you're there, Abhishek, or not. Maybe not. I think Alvin, the question is in terms of progress on stock versus progress on sales, and I know there's a lag there that can often exist with vehicle life cycles, etc. I don't know if you're able to, if you have any insights on that front.
Yeah, I think the question was related to the target slide that I had, that just looked into whether the different types of targets that are being adopted by the different countries. It's just a categorization that we used considering what we found in the documents. Just to put this, I suppose it also has a lot to do in terms of the strategy, in terms of the typology of the country, whether they are into production, or whether they are just looking at the total fleets. I think it's also a reflection of the data that's available to them. In case they would have, let's say, robust registration systems that already reflect electric vehicles into the registration systems, maybe that's also a determinant of whether they are going for, let's say, production-based target, sales-based target, or as a stock-based target in general. I think that's just how the different targets are being selected in that case. So yeah, it's just different strategies based on circumstances, based on priorities, and based on data availability as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alvin. And we have a really good question from Rodrigo that's come through. Rodrigo says that many of the countries featured, for example, China, India, Thailand, Indonesia, have a strong automotive manufacturer base with strong policies and incentives for charging infrastructure, vehicle and parts production or purchase. Are there any relevant examples of countries without such a base that are succeeding in accelerating adoption of e-mobility? If so, what have been some of the policies or measures adopted?
Thank you very much, Rodrigo, for the question. I think it's a very interesting but very difficult to answer question as of now, considering as we've mentioned earlier, we're, let's say, in the nascent stages in terms of the adoption of electric mobility. Not just in the region, but globally. There would be, let's say, pockets of successful implementation. Let's say, some cities or even public transport companies that had really looked into the adoption of electric vehicles on the fleet, which relied on, number one, vision, number two, specific consideration and testing of these technologies on ground. So relying on real-life pilot applications. I think, it's really, I suppose, a combination of the different measures that provides, number one, the vision. Number two, provides the evidence for moving towards the electric vehicles, electrification of the whatever components or the sector, and then the ability to handle the transition. I think those are at the core. Yeah, but maybe I can get back to you in, I don't know, like maybe 5 years or so, just to properly answer that question in terms of let's say the successful ones which really don't have specific basis in terms of um, uh, production, in terms of production of electric vehicles, components and chargers as well. So yeah, but very interesting to mull upon discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, and Thea, thank you for your gift. That's really interesting. There are a couple more questions, Alvin. First one is, what are the notable supranational cooperation initiatives that could be transformative in terms of supporting scaled transition towards e-mobility?
Okay. Yeah. So for that one, I think there are also interesting developments at the regional, let's say regional levels. The ones that I've seen, for example, in the ASEAN region, I think last year there was a pronouncement or a declaration by the ASEAN member states in terms of cultivating, let's say, a regional EV ecosystem, providing commitments in terms of developing regional EV ecosystem across the different member states, and really let's say making ASEAN as a global production hub for electric vehicles. And then I remember seeing something as well, or I remember that there are developments in terms of how the Pacific Island states are coming together in terms of looking at regional synergies. For example, looking at developing harmonized standards, or maybe even looking at procurement strategies, or bulking orders, for example. And these are let's say economies that do not have necessarily like basis for electric vehicle production or assembly. So these are the sorts of regional initiatives and cooperation developments that are happening, which I think would be interesting to monitor moving forward, and also they would probably play a significant roles moving forward in the region.
Super, thanks, Alvin. And the final question is quite pertinently, where can we find more information about the work that you have presented?
Thank you very much, Tom. So again, I would like to invite everyone to have a look at the emobility.tools website, which is like a toolbox. You'll find a lot of information on anything about electric mobility tools, calculation tools, profiles, etc. And then I would also like to invite everyone to have a look at the asiantransportoutlook.com website, containing various information data sets that are open, freely accessible for let's say more than 50 economies in Asia and more than 450 cities across the globe. So yeah, I think that would be great if you can have a look at these websites. So.
Super, thank you, Alvin, and I'm sure we can share more details as well as we circulate the presentation from this amongst the community. I just wanted to, before we close, we're almost perfectly on time, which is always good. Just to thank you for your time today and preparing and delivering your presentation, Alvin. I think it's been really insightful, and lots of good questions coming through. Kind of underscores that as well, and also thank you to all our participants. Another really well attended webinar. Fantastic. Thank you for your time wherever you're joining us from. Please join us for the next session, which will be held a fortnight today, same time, same place, on the 31st of January. We will be having a bit of a role reversal. I will be presenting on the topic of implementing micromobility effectively. So look forward to seeing you all again there. And yeah, otherwise, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day. And look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.